questions. The Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians cannot believe their ears. They have been tricked by this Prime Minister. He knows very well that his irresponsible actions are hurting average Canadians. Will the Prime Minister apologize to Canadians before his broken promise during the election campaign? Because all Canadians are suffering. They have seen their savings evaporate because they believed what the Prime Minister said. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada responded to changes in the market. Those changes meant that major corporations in Canada would not be paying any taxes, and individuals would pay more taxes, which was unacceptable to this government. Our decision was supported by the Quebec Finance Minister, and this is a Liberal government which is in office there. So I do not understand why the Liberal Party of Canada feels that zero taxation for major corporations is appropriate, and why they are opposed to cutting taxes for seniors.
He can do all he likes to try and turn this into something about corporations. This isn't about corporations. It's about Canadians from all walks of life who've lost their savings, Mr. Speaker. Tell that story, Mr. Speaker, to Canadians sitting around the dinner table tonight, saying with their head in their hands, saying, "What do we do now?" It's about Canadians on Main Street who feel cheated. The Prime Minister is the author of their misfortune, yet he refuses to admit it. It's him that lured Canadians into investing in his promise. It wasn't the big corporations. It was the average person that was lured in, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister at least admit that he misled Canadians and offer them an apology?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, everyone in this country knows that in the last few months what we have seen is the beginning of the conversion of major corporations to income trusts, which would have resulted in them paying no taxes whatsoever, which would have shifted the tax burden to ordinary Canadians. Mr. Speaker, that is not fair. That is not what this government promised. This government is determined to have a fair system of taxation, and I think the Liberal Party can explain in the next election why it believes corporations shouldn't pay any tax in this country.
The Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I said, tell that to the average person who's seen their savings wiped out in a single night. We hear a lot from this party about accountability, Mr. Speaker. But who over there is accountable to average Canadians who lost their money because of this Conservative double-crossing? Since the last election, many Canadians put their money into income trusts precisely because the Prime Minister told them to do it, and he told them he'd protect them. Now, how does the Prime Minister explain his duplicity to those Canadians who believed in him and have seen their money go up in smoke because he is now willing to be accountable to them, Mr. Speaker?
The Right Honourable the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the Liberal Party had its way and corporate Canada paid no tax whatsoever, all of the tax burden would shift to ordinary people and to senior citizens. That is why this government has acted. This government has given a 4-year window before these changes take effect so that people can make adjustments, and this government has given immediate tax reduction to senior citizens through income splitting of pensions and through a raised age credit. And Canadians will be wondering why the party opposite opposes tax cuts for senior citizens.
The Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Westmount-Ville-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the circumstances right now are no different than they were a year ago. The only thing that has changed is the promise made by the Prime Minister. He said that he was in favor of income trusts, but now he's surprised that corporations use them. Why does the Minister not have the courage to tell Canadians, and it is easy to do, I made a promise, I broke my promise, I apologize? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, this government is not apologizing for protecting the interests of individuals, for having a tax system where corporations pay their fair share. This is why the Liberal government in Quebec supports us in this, and it is incredible that the Liberal Party of Canada feels that major corporations in Canada should not pay any taxes.
Westmount.
The Honourable Member for Westmount Grimaki. Mr. Speaker, I think that it is very disappointing that our Prime Minister is not even able to say to Canadians, I am sorry. I made a promise, circumstances have changed, and therefore I broke my promise. Why is it so difficult for him to admit this simple fact to the citizens of Canada? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
The party opposite seems incapable of handling this file. They had no plan for the file. Their critics said they had no position on the file, and then when they addressed it last year, they bungled it. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that we have support from Newfoundland and Labrador, from Prince Edward Island, from Quebec, from Ontario, from Alberta. Most Canadians and most governments in this country understand the long-term interests of the Canadian economy, as does the Globe and Mail, as does the Toronto Star. Those who look at
the Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of the Environment will be taking part in the International Environment Conference on Climate Change in Nairobi. But, in fact, her proposals go against the Kyoto Protocol. Unlike other countries, she wants to sabotage the protocol. Work has already been started on the Kyoto Protocols, and could the government explain what the Environment Minister is going there to do? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I do not accept in any way the analysis that has been presented by the Bloc Québécois leader. The Environment Minister is going to the conference to work on coming up with an effective international protocol that will address the issue of large final emitters. It is not that we are against the protocol, but we need a more effective protocol. We need to work with other participants to meet our objectives. The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. The Prime Minister, if he thinks his proposal is so good, and if his Environment Minister is going there to do these good things, why not have a debate next week here in the House to give the Environment Minister a real mandate to go there and to have the House have its say? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, this government will obviously attend the conference in Nairobi to present Canada's position. The leader of the Bloc Québécois asked to have a Bloc Québécois representative attend and accompany the delegation and express the Bloc Québécois' position. And if I understand properly, the support is for the protocol, but without any plan to implement it. Why has the Prime Minister not implemented the protocol? This is a bad environmental decision and a bad economic decision. The Canadian companies will be investing abroad, and we will have a loss of $550 billion. This is a bad decision that should be overturned. It is only favorable to oil companies that pollute. Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
See the honourable member puff his chest out and act like he supports the environment. But in reality, Mr. Speaker, he owes an apology to this House. Today he voted against the environment. He voted against cleaning up this air. He owes an apology, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. The income trust decision was a decision made to correct an earlier position, and the same should be done with the Kyoto Protocol. This is a bad decision. He should eventually change his position. After all, the Montreal Exchange is unable to undertake carbon trading, and people will invest elsewhere and create jobs elsewhere. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Of the honourable member not doing his homework. Nothing prevents the Montreal Exchange from establishing a carbon credit along the lines that currently exist in Chicago. The notice of intent that we released last week explicitly mentions carbon trading as one of the issues we'll be consulting on. I encourage the member to do his homework and read the notice of intent.
The honourable member for Toronto, Danforth.
1991 in Doha, Kuwait, Canada sent the soldiers of the 1st Combat Engineer Regiment to fight a fire at a U.S. munitions depot, and one soldier on that mission has already died of cancer, and about 60 others have developed cancer or respiratory systems after the incident. Yesterday's report of the military ombudsman says that these soldiers were, and I quote, systematically ignored during and after their service to Canada. That's a shameful indictment. Will the Prime Minister commit to moving immediately forward on the recommendations of this damning report and right the wrongs that these brave men and women have endured?
Honourable the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I met with the Ombudsman, reviewed his report, and I have ordered our department to implement the changes immediately. We will not treat soldiers like they were treated in the past. We will make sure that from now on and into the future, they will be treated properly when they return from missions.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Toronto, Danforth.
Mr. Speaker, the first way that the Minister and his government can show that they're serious about that is to vote for our motion, putting veterans first, that we're debating here today. MPtv a déposé une motion pour aider nos...
We introduced a motion to help our veterans, but the Prime Minister wants to ignore them like he is ignoring the Ombudsman's report. We're hearing terrible stories from our soldiers, depression, suicide attempts, difficult health records. Why should the government refuse to take care of these soldiers when they come back? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Once again, Mr. Speaker, the National Defence Minister has said that the government is going to accept the report regarding veterans. It is unacceptable that veterans have been treated this way, and we are going to correct the situation.
Scarborough Guildwood.
Mr. Speaker, the income trust betrayal by this government has cost millions of investors billions of dollars. I would like to know what the Prime Minister says to Mr. Gary Collard, who wrote to the member from Calgary West. In appreciation of my vote, you and the Conservatives caused thousands of my life savings dollars to evaporate overnight. In exchange for my thousands, you gave me seniors' income splitting. I'm looking for the humor in this. I invested my entire life savings after you promised me you would not be taxed. Will the Prime Minister admit to Mr. Collard that he misled him during the election?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, this intellectually bankrupt party opposite had no idea how to deal with this issue. As the Globe and Mail said, Canada becoming an income trust economy would be less competitive, less productive, less innovative than it needs to be in the global arena. The Globe and Mail gets it. The members opposite don't get it. Not only didn't they get it, they don't get it now. They bungled it last year. We've done what's fair for Canadians. They think the phone companies shouldn't pay taxes. We do.
Honourable member for Scarborough Guildwood. Order.
Mr. Speaker, the only bankruptcy we're talking about here are millions of Canadian investors. It takes some gall to destroy a man's life savings and then ask for his vote. Is this what the Prime Minister would also say to Mr. Sikora from Kingston, who lost thousands of dollars yesterday, and he's hopping mad? You've stolen thousands of dollars from my aged parents in their retirement home. from my wife and from me. You've lied to us about leaving income trusts alone. Is he going to give the same answer, or is he going to apologize to Mr. Sikora and his family?
Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
You know what, Mr. Speaker, this is what one would expect from a party that's against reducing the GST, that voted against reducing the GST, that is against allowing pensioners to income split in this country, saving, for example, $2,500 on a single pension household with $40,000, who are in favor of letting corporations not pay their fair share of taxes on every tax issue, every fairness issue for Canadians. The party opposite is wrong.
The Honourable Member for Outremont. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, when millions of seniors were watching their life savings evaporate because of the Prime Minister's broken promise, the unelected minister, Michael Fortier, said that small investors should just take a Valium. Will the Prime Minister apologize to Canadians on behalf of his arrogant and insensitive minister? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Simply referring, Mr. Speaker, to the markets and the fact that there was some volatility in the markets yesterday that was to be expected. And the realistic view, which many people on Bay Street and on St. James Street in Montreal expressed, is that one should take time, one should look at the fact that there's a 4-year grandparenting of the changes with respect to income trusts, that people should have perspective with respect to all of the changes that were made, announced on Tuesday.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Accept the fact that his unelected, millionaire, arrogant Minister of Public Works tells Canadians that are worried to take a Valium. How can the Prime Minister continue to protect his millionaire buddy?
The Honourable Minister of Finance. Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Finance has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, how arrogant is it to expect ordinary Canadians to bear a tax burden greater than corporations bear, large corporations in this country? How arrogant is it to say to average Canadians, pensioners, that they should not be entitled to split income for pensions? That's arrogance. That's the position of the Liberal Party opposite.
Exactly.
The Honourable Member for Marcorel-Fortin. Mr. Speaker, in the Dawson College tragedy, there was an internet blog entry that showed that the person who committed this crime was intending to do this. If the judge had said that he would have acted if this case had been presented to him, the RCMP, does the RCMP monitor this, and is the gun registry going to be maintained? To begin with, Mr. Speaker, this was under the jurisdiction of the Quebec Police Force, the Sûreté du Québec, and we need to look at the situation. Obviously, we need to monitor threatening situations, but Canadians across the country, if they have any information about people who could pose a risk, should inform the local police force. The Honourable Member for Marcorel-Fortin. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that we can find some common ground. Obviously, police looking at the internet are like someone looking for a needle in a haystack, but there are child pornography sites, and it has been possible to find pedophiles this way. Will the government commit to publicizing this information so that people on the internet can denounce other people? Well, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the RCMP Center has a site where it can follow people involved in child pornography. And something else that can help us is if the Liberal members will make up their minds to support the bill to raise the age of protection from 14 to 16 years of age. The Honourable Member for Quebec. Mr. Speaker, on July 25th, the Prime Minister announced with great pomp and circumstance that all Hep C victims would be given financial assistance. But 5 months later, they have still received nothing. He said this would happen within 3 months. Can he make a commitment to provide assistance on an interim basis immediately to these victims until the final details are resolved? The Hep C Victims Coalition is asking for this. The Honourable Minister of Health.
As you know, the Prime Minister announced an historic compensation package for victims of Hep C. There was, at the time of that announcement, a whole schedule that has to be enjoined. There has to be a final settlement, which I understand is in train. Then there has to be a court proceeding or a series of court proceedings where that final settlement is approved, and we are on track with the Prime Minister's promise in 2007 to have the money in the hands of these victims, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Laval. Mr. Speaker, the National Homeland Security Department in the United States has decided to confiscate internet pharmaceutical problems coming into the U.S., but this is likely to increase the price of drugs in Canada. Can the minister explain to his American counterpart that Canada cannot provide the drugs that Americans need? The Honourable Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, in Canada, we have a pricing program that that's the Price Compensation Board. And I would say to the Honourable Member that there is a process for setting price, and there is no connection with the prices in our country.
For Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative election platform made a specific promise to seniors to preserve income trusts by not imposing any new taxes on them. And the Prime Minister went further. When he came to Oakville, he promised my constituents face to face that a Conservative government would, and I quote, not monkey around with their income trusts. Now he's denying those promises. He has cost many Canadians tens of thousands of dollars and put their futures in jeopardy. Will the Prime Minister now admit he broke his promise?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Commitment, Mr. Speaker, of course, was to support security, financial security for seniors in Canada. And what we saw this year is an acceleration of the creation of income trusts. More than $70 billion worth of income trusts announced this year only. And not only did we have this acceleration of income trusts, Mr. Speaker, we also had the reality that income trusts were entering into active areas of business requiring investments in technology, machinery, and equipment, particularly in the telecommunications sector. This presented a clear and present danger to the health of the Canadian economy.
The Honourable Member for Oakville.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised he would not do this. He can't seem to apologize for breaking his word. Canadians have learned this is a government that can't apologize even when it's wrong. This was a bait-and-switch scheme on Canadians who invested their hard-earned money based on the Prime Minister's own words. This is no time for monkey business, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister still deny that he made a pledge to Canadians that he would not impose a new tax on income trusts?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Platform, Mr. Speaker, certainly pledged income security for seniors, and there's a major tax change that was announced on Tuesday. I know the Liberal Party is opposed to pension splitting for seniors in Canada. I know that is the position of that particular political party. We recognize that this is a major change in tax policy, Mr. Speaker, that is vitally important for seniors, for pensioners in Canada who have sought this tax change for many, many years. This is a tax change that was recommended more than 40 years ago. This government listened to pensioners in Canada, have responded with a major change in tax policy.
The
honourable member for Notre-Dame de Grâce-Lachine. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Minister of Public Security claimed that he agreed in principle with the comments made by Mr. Harim, a student who was a victim from the shootout at Dawson College. But today the same minister says that he will dismantle the firearms registry. So I would ask once again of the minister to answer the question put by Hyder. Why abolish a firearm registry that's proven itself and it costs almost nothing to maintain now and could save lives? The Honourable Minister of Public Security.
We've done a couple of things here. First of all, in attempting to contact the gentleman mentioned, looking forward to sitting down with him. I believe he's, having gone through this tragedy, that he has some particular insights which may be helpful to us. His press secretary informed me that he'll be busy on Monday when I propose to go to Montreal, but I certainly find another time. And I do agree in principle, as all Canadians do, Mr. Speaker, we want a firearm system that is effective at reducing criminal activity with firearms, and we aim to get that, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Notre-Dame de Grâce-Lachine.
Also in contact with Hayder and with his press secretary. And I will keep asking the same question until Hayder Kadim gets an answer. He's the college shooting victim who challenged this government to answer a simple question. And here it is for the third time to the Prime Minister through you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Kadim asks, why does this government insist on dismantling a gun registry proven to have saved lives and which now costs next to nothing to maintain?
The Honourable the Minister of Public Safety.
I don't think for a minute my colleague opposite is intentionally trying to mislead Canadians, but she should be clear, the gun registry is not being dismantled. Mr. Speaker, if you want to own or purchase a firearm in this country, you have to have a license for that. If you want to own or acquire a firearm that is restricted in any way, you also have to have an added license for that, and that registry is being maintained. There's one portion of the registry, Mr. Speaker, that has proven to be a waste of money, and the Auditor General says the data isn't good. That's to do with long arms that in 2003 were only responsible for 0.5% of homicides, Mr. Speaker. We want to go against...
The honourable member for Lévis-Belchesse. Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the Minister of Transport, of Infrastructure and Communities. The Director of the Applied Economic Institute for the HEC of Montreal and also co-chair of the Advisory Committee on the Fiscal Imbalance of the Council of the Federation, Mr. Robert Gagné, writes today that the leader of the Bloc Québécois and his big brother André Boisclair are misleading the people about the fiscal imbalance. How does the Minister of Transport react to that? I would like to hear what my honourable colleague has to say, the Honourable Minister of Transport. An excellent question, Mr. Speaker. I think that the problem, Mr. Speaker, for the BQ and the PQ is the verbal imbalance. In several newspapers today, in Quebec, there is an article written by the author of the Council of the Federation. Mr. Gagné says, by manipulating the data, the Bloc Québécois are misleading the people. End of quote, Mr. Speaker. This is very clear that the block contribution conversation is totally false.
Douglas. Mr. Speaker, Tuesday, the Citizenship and Immigration Committee visited the Kingston Immigration Holding Center, and Mahmoud Jabala, Mohammed Majoub, and Hassan Amre, who are held there on security certificates. These men, detained 5 or 6 years without charges or conviction, have never been allowed private spousal visits, are strip searched and required to wear a prison uniform when meeting with family, friends, and lawyers, and have no programming, among other issues. Will the Minister of Public Safety immediately act to reverse these practices?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, just reminding Canadians that these particular individuals are subject to a process called security certificates. That process has been upheld in federal courts of appeal a number of times. These are people who are deemed to be a security risk if they are allowed to be in Canada. And Mr. Speaker, it's you could say a three-sided prison cell. They can leave any time if they want to go back to their country of provenance. And they are working through the appeals process right now. And if the courts uphold their appeal, then they're free to go, Mr. Speaker. Other than that, they are deemed a risk at this particular point in time.
Honourable member for Burnaby Douglas.
Mr. Speaker, will Hood return to torture? Mr. Speaker, recently the correctional investigator asked the government to expand his mandate to include the Kingston Immigration Holding Center and the security certificate detainees. He noted that the establishment of the holding center removed the detainees to a situation where they, quote, no longer have the benefits and legal protections afforded by ombudsman legislation. Will the Minister of Public Safety act immediately to extend the mandate of the correctional investigator to include the holding center and security certificate detainees?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that those 5 individuals are in a facility of their own, $3.2 million to construct, constructed by the former Liberals, but it's so that they're not in the rest of the population, Mr. Speaker. They are unique individuals, and they're there for a unique purpose that has been upheld by the Federal Court of Appeal. And others, Mr. Speaker, who are concerned about rights and are concerned about treatment of inmates have viewed that facility and have said that it's a good and a more than adequate facility, and will continue to remain so, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Labrador.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister for anything but Caledonia and Saskatchewan likes to travel more than he likes filing expense reports. On June the 26th, he flew from Washington to Toronto. He then hailed an empty Challenger from Ottawa, which the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary tells us costs $11,000 an hour to fetch him in Toronto, when there are commercial flights between the two cities every hour. Can the Minister explain why he ordered an empty Challenger to fly him one way from Toronto to Ottawa instead of taking one of the many commercial flights that were available to him?
Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member has his facts completely wrong. The Minister, in fact, was stranded at Toronto's Pearson International Airport on June 27th at 1 a.m. with no commercial flights available because of cancellations. He took a Challenger to Ottawa and arrived at 2 a.m. He was in time for the cabinet meetings that began at 7:30 a.m. on the same day, and later that day he needed a Challenger to get to Washington to make a speech by 5 p.m. the same day. Mr. Speaker, I know this will make the honourable member happy. This government has used the Challenger half the frequency of the previous government.
The Honourable member for Labrador. Order.
Speaker, they use only half the time, and they haven't been there for a quarter of the time that we were in office. It get worse, Mr. Speaker. After his meeting the next day, he took another flying limousine back to Washington, even though there are at least 4 direct non-stop flights from Ottawa to Washington every day. And on top of this, his expense report doesn't list his use of the government jet. Staffers take unaccompanied joyrides to Washington. Conservatives get freebie flights to cocktail parties and subsidised trips to hockey games. When will the government and this minister start following the rules and list the full cost of these joyrides and which department pays?
Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, you would have thought the honourable member, after getting his facts wrong on the first question, wouldn't have asked the second question. In any case, Mr. Speaker, I'll point out again that it was necessary for the minister to take the Challenger to get to Washington. There were no commercial flights available that were going to get him there on time. And again, let's all celebrate the fact that the Challenger is being used half the time it was under his government.
Honourable member for Malpeque.
The minister's discredited task force has failed by every measure, Mr. Speaker, except that it will give corporate U.S. grain sector what it wants. More economic power at our farmers' expense. Look at the report. Not a single reference to gains for farmers, absolutely none. How can the minister defend an action that has its strongest support in the U.S.? Popping champagne in U.S. boardrooms, heartbreak for Canadian farm families. Does the Prime Minister just not care about Canadian farmers?
The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
We campaigned during the election, during the past election campaign, on behalf of farmers who wanted marketing choice. Mr. Speaker, they wanted a strong, independent, voluntary Canadian Wheat Board in a marketing choice world. Mr. Speaker, and after we had this task force report, it delivered a very good report on how that transition might take place. Our first recommendation, Mr. Speaker, was to move on barley. Mr. Speaker, we're going to have a plebiscite on barley in the new year.
Honourable member for Malpeque.
The only farmers this minister is listening to live in North Dakota, Kansas, and Nebraska. In giving the United States its way, the minister's undemocratic acts are getting worse. Now he's initiating a Stalinist purge, firing a pro-board director and inserting an anti-wheat board activist. How can he expect such a director to act in good faith with a view to the best interest of the corporation and farmers? Or is he just attempting to destroy the board from the inside?
Right. The Honourable the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
I guess the real question is, after days and days, he wouldn't wait for the task force report, but when, Mr. Speaker, it came, it delivered the goods, Mr. Speaker, and for days the member opposite said, please give us a plebiscite for the farmers of Western Canada. Mr. Speaker, we're not only going to represent the farmers, representing them from coast to coast, Mr. Speaker, we're going to have a plebiscite, which that member asked for. Why doesn't he get on board and listen to the farmers for a change?
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, farmers are grappling with a serious income crisis caused by low grain prices, but the Parliamentary Secretary told us that the situation will improve for grain producers. Does the Minister of Agriculture know that the price doesn't cover production costs and that it's important that he take action now? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Concerned about grain farmers across the country. Mr. Speaker, we're not only moving on marketing choice for Western Canadian grain farmers, but the first action of this government was to follow through on the $755 million grains and oilseeds payment to all grain farmers across the country. We followed that up, Mr. Speaker, with $950 million to help repair the broken case program brought in by the previous Liberal government. That will help somewhat more. Thankfully, prices are starting to come up, Mr. Speaker, but we're going to work closely with farmers in Quebec and across the country to make sure they get the returns they need.
The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. The Minister knows that the income programs do not apply for the people who are losing a lot of money every year. This is why yesterday they gave 8 tons of grain to the Minister of Labour's office yesterday. Will he help producers and announce emergency aid for these grain producers? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Speaker, I listed some of the things we did. I could go on. Why don't I go on about how we're helping grains and oilseeds farmers, Mr. Speaker? We also initiated, as promised in the campaign, a cover crop program for any farmers that are affected by flooding. That helped farmers in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and in Quebec that benefited from that program. We've also doubled the amount of money that farmers can borrow interest-free through cash advances and through the AMPA program. We've expanded that to include horticulture and livestock, Mr. Speaker. We've got the grains and oilseeds program, Mr. Speaker. We continue to add programming to help Canadian farmers.
Member for York West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The success of Canada's cities are dependent on an effective transportation network. The Spadina subway extension will improve access to York University and to Vaughan City Centre. City of Toronto, York Region and the province all have their funding in place and the environmental assessment completed. Since the government's Clean Air Act will do nothing to improve air quality in our cities, will they commit today to a project which at least will improve the quality of air, as well the overall quality of life in Canada's largest cities? What are they waiting for to deliver the check?
The Minister of Transport.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have during the last several months, of course, consulted the provinces and we've consulted the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we were able to have and put aside $16.5 billion for infrastructure, but we also put aside $1.3 billion for public transit. And that money is already available. It is now flowing. The agreements are there. And hopefully the communities and cities will take that money to be able to go forward.
Honourable Member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, the City of Toronto has worked extremely hard in preparing their bid for World Expo in 2015. Now, unfortunately, their wishes to host the World Exposition were completely lost on the provincial Liberals. Could the Minister of Canadian Heritage update the House on the news of Toronto's wish, their best wish, to host Expo 2015?
Well, the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed that the Toronto Expo bid will not go forward. This government supported Toronto in its bid for Expo 2015, and we were prepared to commit up to $600 million in support for the Expo and to support Toronto. Mr. Speaker, Toronto's bid for Expo is dead because the Ontario government would not do its part, because the Ontario government would not support an Expo in Toronto. Why wouldn't the Ontario government do its part? They have to answer as to the lost opportunity for Toronto.
The Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Every report on income security released in the last 6 months indicates poverty is growing deeper and more pervasive. I have been consulting across the country, and people tell me the recent cuts by the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development are hurting the poor disproportionately. Why will the Minister not stand up for her ministry and fight these cuts?
The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Well, frankly, Mr. Speaker, I'm absolutely and thoroughly confused by the member from Sault Ste. Marie because
the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development has the floor for an answer.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is complaining about cuts to programs, and yet he himself just tabled a motion to take $2 million of spending out of social development. Why is that, Mr. Speaker?
Honourable Member for Sault Ste. Marie.
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only is she confused, but she's wrong. It doesn't matter how the minister spins this. Her ministry took the largest hit, and it is driving poverty through the permafrost. Homelessness in Canada's most prosperous cities, Victoria, Calgary, and Toronto, is growing at an alarming rate. I'm going to Calgary and Saskatoon next week to meet with the homeless, people who work with the homeless, people working to eradicate poverty. Will the minister join me and see for herself?
The Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd still like to know why that member tabled a motion asking for $2 million to be cut from social development spending.
Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, the government's trying to trick Canadians into believing they're spending $80 million on adult literacy. I've asked repeatedly for details of that spending. I've gotten zilch. If the cuts to literacy are as trivial as a cup of coffee, as the minister claims, then she should have the details of what's left at her fingertips. Will she table those details in the House today, or will she admit she's not being truthful with Canadians?
The Honourable the Minister of Human Resources and Social Development.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I explained at some length and very often to the member last night, the existing programs, existing commitments are all going to be honored. It's going forward that we're going to realize savings for Canadians by focusing on programs that deliver measurable results in helping people learn the literacy and numeracy skills.
Honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, it's bad enough that the Ontario Liberals are charging soldiers and RCMP members health premiums when their coverage is already paid for by the federal government. Now they want to have retired federal public servants who've served their country so well excluded from the drug plan for seniors. Can the President of the Treasury Board tell us how he is fighting on behalf of retired federal public servants in Ontario to ensure their freedom?
Honourable the President of the Treasury Board.
I want to say to the member for Renfrew County, that's the best question I've seen all day. I am, like the member from Renfrew County, I'm tremendously concerned about the two-class of citizens that is being introduced by the provincial government in the province of Ontario. Those seniors who served our country in the public service, in the RCMP, and in the armed forces are being cut off their medical drug program that they spent their entire life paying for, Mr. Speaker. Why do the Ontario Liberals believe in a two-tiered health care plan for our seniors? I'm going to work with the Ontario government.
The Honourable Member for Halton.
Speaker, the Finance Minister did the right thing this week by realizing that retired couples should be able to split their income for tax purposes. Can he tell us, does he agree that working families should also benefit from income splitting, especially when one spouse stays at home and looks after the kids, who can then make RSP contributions to look after their future? Does he agree with that?
Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question, and I certainly acknowledge the extensive work the honourable member did with respect to advocacy of the issue of income splitting for pensioners in Canada. That policy is now going forward. It is a major change in tax policy in Canada. There's special reason to make the change with respect to pensioners, to encourage investment and savings for retirement through pension vehicles. I understand the principle that the member speaks about, and certainly it's worthy of further study, as are other tax measures. Thank you, Speaker.
Order.
I would like to point out the presence in the gallery, the winners of the Governor General's Awards, winners for Performing Arts.
Performing Arts, we have Mark Starowitz, Lorne Michaels, Albert Miller, Robbie Robertson, Joyce-Anne Sidimus, Jacques Languirand, the Raymond the Raymond John Natition Award for Volunteerism in the Performing Arts, Georges and Sharif Leoun.